Qualifying session of the weekend. Ben Edwards and John Watson with you once again, and we've travelled from the forests of the Ardennes in Belgium to the northern part of Italy, around 40 minutes from Milan, to this beautiful wooded parkland of the Monza Royal Park. A 3.6-mile track steeped in history, has been through many transformations over the years, and which sees some more changes again this year.
Indeed, further changes for safety. Well, those that couldn't be incorporated for the 1994 Grand Prix have now been built in, and the circuit really now up to the standard of safety that drivers expect from a Grand Prix track. The principal changes coming, first of all, in the Curva Grande, more runoff space. The second chicane, fairly major change there. That's been brought 50 meters nearer to the Curva Grande than previously it was. Then the next major change comes at Lesmo 1. That is a big change again. That corner is a slower entry and therefore a slower exit. And then you go round to complete the lap with changes to curbing and gravel traps. Well, I just got that in before the cue point. But the major changes to the circuit really are down at the Lesmo curves. And from an emotional point of view, I have to say that those two corners on the Monza racetrack were two of my favorites. In fact, I made contact with one of them fairly heavily back in 1981. I was so fond of that corner. The only corner now fundamentally unchanged from my time here is the wonderful Parabolica. That's a full 180-degree corner, and a very critical corner indeed, because it leads onto the fastest part of the circuit. That's at the start-finish line, and then the charge down into the first of the three chicanes, the Goodyear chicane. But the importance of Parabolica is to be able to get on the power as early as possible, because by the time you finish the exit of the corner, you're already doing nearly 180 miles an hour. So vital to have a good exit on that corner to guarantee good top speed on the run down into that first chicane.
Well, we saw some pretty high top speeds this morning, and of course that is one of the features of this track. And there you're looking at the driver with the highest top speed of all in this morning's free practice, the star of the Ferrari fans, Jean Alesi. Of course, he's not going to be there next year. Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger both switching to Benetton, but for today, Jean Alesi was the fastest in the free practice this session, and Johnny was over 200 miles an hour as he went across the start-finish line, and there's still some way to go before he gets to the chicane.
Well, you're looking at about a good 400 to 500 meters before you get to that chicane, and the car will continue to accelerate. Now, the majority of teams here are running in a fairly low downforce setup, but people like Ferrari who've got the horsepower, and Williams for that matter, Benetton, and even McLaren with the Mercedes-Benz engine, they were running noticeably more wing than other teams who are trying to find a balance between straight line speed and getting around a corner quickly. But one reason why Alesi was quick this morning is due to the third version of their Evolution engine, and that helped him considerably in terms of that top speed and acceleration. Gerhard Berger didn't have it for the morning, and in fact he had other problems to contend with, so brake problems and other little bits and pieces kept Gerhard Berger down in 9th place. Disappointing for the Austrian, but come qualifying, I'm sure he'll be right up with his teammate Alesi.
We're watching Andrea Montermini in the Pacific Ford, the only car on the circuit at the moment. Gives us a chance to have a look at the track conditions, which were wet this morning. We started off with a very slippery surface indeed, and everybody went out on wets. Gradually, as the session progressed, they switched to slicks, and Alesi fastest on slicks at the end, but there were still some damp patches around. Now it's looking good.
Well, the track is dry, but of course it's still very green, and in parts of the circuit where the new surface is done, to have had a chance for that oil to come up through. Now, last week Ferrari and Sauber, they tested here and they were happy with the circuit, but after rain, track conditions will need to be run in again. So Andrea Montermini, the first out and taking full advantage of a clear track, but other teams will sit back and watch, try to gauge the kind of speed improvement that we may see from a car that was running towards the tail of the field. Montermini did a 1:38.821 this morning. This lap will be considerably quicker than that, but we have to see by how much.
So Montermini will be the first to establish a time here at Monza this weekend. He's running down this long start-finish straight, building up the speed, and across the line he goes, a 43.487, and just to give you an idea on his speeds, 303 kilometers per hour.
Well, Andrea Montermini's lap, in fact, the first lap was the 43. He has done a 35.098, so he's some 2.5 seconds quicker than this morning, and he will get quicker. Now, one factor for that is Goodyear have brought their hardest compound, that's their A compound tire, to Monza. very, very tough circuit and tyres. Because of the predominance of high-speed running, that puts heat and energy into the tyre, and Goodyear traditionally use that A compound only here at Monza.
There you can see the car quite twitchy under braking, and just using a little bit of curve on the exit. Of course, this through the revised Lesmo, and this the second corner, the second Lesmo, which hasn't changed quite as much as the first, but the first one has definitely been slowed down, and you could see when he was under hard braking, the car fairly lively.
Yeah, it's just fidgeting around on the circuit. And for Montermini, you know, again, they're under braking coming up to the Ascari chicane. This is the best of the 3 chicanes at Monza. Very fast exit. You see the curve in the exit. People use that to help them on the exit of the corner, but occasionally you can get caught out, and riding that curve can give you real frightening moments.
So Montermini looks as though he's going to see an improvement in his time on this second lap. He's still the only car on the circuit, and his teammate Giovanni Lavaggi didn't manage to get out at all this morning. They had a gearbox problem. They fitted a brand new gearbox to his car after it got destroyed at Spa, but they weren't able to get it out this morning. A 33.731 for Andrea Montermini. So at the moment, he's fastest. Just a nice shot of him through the Ascari chicane, and we'll be seeing a lot more of this sort of action throughout the course of this first qualifying session, I'm sure. Just wait for the Ferraris to come out. He's not been on the circuit yet. His teammate, Andrea Montermini, the only driver that's been onto the circuit so far, and his time, 1:33.731. But we're expecting some of the heavy hitters to be coming out soon, and all the fans are waiting for the Ferraris to come out.
Yes, and interesting just around the circuit, but particularly in front of the pits here, the grandstands facing the pits, there is so much support for Gerhard Berger, not just from Austria or from Germany, but from Italy. And I think the Italian fans are bitterly disappointed that Gerhard Berger has chosen not to stay with the beloved Ferrari team. He's going to be, of course, with Benetton Renault next year. And that support is massive. One sign that did stand out, and that is Eddie Irvine to Ferrari. It has been discussed, it's been talked about, probably more in the earlier part of the season. But of course, Eddie Irvine has a 2-year contract with the Jordan Peugeot team. There is a buyout clause in that contract, but you've got to be a multi-millionaire to ever consider the possibility of buying Irvine out of that contract. And therefore, I suspect that his prospects will lie with Jordan over the next 2 years.
Giovanni Lavaggi jumping into his car and getting ready to come out. John, of course, since Spa, all this news that Gerhard Berger moving to Ferrari has been confirmed. How has that affected things? Do you think that's really surprised Ferrari? And now where are they going to go to find the driver to back up Michael Schumacher?
I think it surprised them greatly, and Gerhard Berger, in my mind, has made the smartest deal for a driver in the 95 season for next year. And it was all kept fairly quiet. There was discussions with staying at Ferrari with teammate Michael Schumacher, who's joining Ferrari in 96, possibly returning to McLaren. But in the end, he chose to return to the Benetton team, the team he won his first Grand Prix, in fact, with back in 1986. And as I say, for Berger, I think that is the smartest thing he could have done. He's got a 2-year contract. He's going to be with teammate Jean Alesi as well. And I think that Benetton will look initially towards Gerhard Berger to give them the lead on the technical side of the 96 car, because while in essence the cars will be similar, new rules in relation to safety and the cockpit dimensions mean that the aerodynamics around the cockpit will affect how the rest of the car performs, and there are other smaller changes in relation to how aerodynamics will affect in 1996. So Gerhard Berger's moving into a team where he feels he's got a chance of winning on merit, not waiting for maybe teammate Schumacher, who will affect the maximum attention at Ferrari, and therefore Gerhard Berger become a true number 2. He's done what I consider the right thing, but he's left Ferrari management, I think, a bit on their heels. They've now got to go out and negotiate, discuss with a suitable partner for Michael Schumacher. Names in the list, well, David Coulthard, obviously, Rubens Barrichello's another one. At one time, Mika Salo's name, along with Eddie Irvine's, were mentioned. What about Gianni Morbidelli? Possibility of the Italian driver in a Ferrari. He's done testing and races for Ferrari years ago. Or Nicola Larini, the Ferrari test driver. He's told the team, listen, I don't want to be a test driver anymore. Either give me a contract or just let me get on and do my German touring car racing with Alfa Romeo.
Well, we watch to find out with interest what Ferrari will decide, and meanwhile we've got a second car on the circuit now. It's the Japanese driver Taki Inoue, and he's off the circuit as well.
Indeed he is, and he locked up that left front coming into the second chicane. circuit. Again, you see, having been wet, gone dry. When a driver goes out in the morning, as we saw all 23, because Labadji didn't go out, but the track there, that is a resurfaced track. It's still green, inexperience on Inoue's part. The tyres, the A compound, take a long time. Although they've been in tyre blankets, but running slowly, the tyre temperature will drop off. The brake temperatures were low. They tend to be a little bit grabby when they are low. There you saw the combination of all those items, plus a bit of inexperience.
Taki was one of the guys off this morning. A very similar incident. We had a few people off this morning, but the only two who actually ended up damaging their cars, Jean-Christophe Bouillon went off in the Sauber fairly heavily at the Ascari chicane, on the entry to the chicane, and Mika Hakkinen also off. He wiped off the front nose cone off the McLaren down at the first chicane.
It's interesting just to talk about Jean-Christophe Bouillon, because he did a test last week at Silverstone. He was the quickest in the Williams Renault FW17. In a Sauber, he gets blown away by Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and it makes you just wonder how quick is Bouillon. But more to the point, it illustrates how fast the Williams Renault really is, because if an inexperienced driver like Bouillon can be so quick in that car at Silverstone, then that car really is a fast, if not, it is the fastest car in Formula One.
Oh, we have another big moment for Taki Inoue there. He gathers it all together, just about.
And once again, his right foot was the reason for that. Previously, it was on the brake pedal. This time, too much. Let's have a look and see. Comes out of the curb. The car hops a little bit, gets sideways. He gets out of the throttle. Fortunately, doesn't hit anything.
The second fastest time in this morning's free practice, but he's not been out on the circuit yet. And in fact, we've still only seen Taki Inoue and Andrea Montermini set a time so far. And in fact, Taki Inoue's just taken the fastest time by just 0.2 of a second from Andrea Montermini.
And as tension and excitement is mounting here at Monza, Roberto Moreno in the 40 Corsa Ford is the third car after 14 minutes 55.55 seconds to come onto the Monza circuit. And still, well, that's a familiar sight right now, the Jordan up on its jacks, but that is the case throughout the pit lane, because nobody really of the, let's say, the front runners is prepared to go out. An interesting shot in the Jordan pits, of course, was looking at the rear wing. Almost no rear wing whatsoever. And when you get a chance to contrast that with what Ferrari or Williams, Benetton, but principally McLaren are running, that's the difference. And that is all about horsepower. If you haven't got the horsepower, you've got to compromise. Part of the trouble that we saw with Taki Inoue when he got into trouble under locking brakes was also a function of downforce, because with the Hart V8 engine that Inoue has in the footwork chassis, he hasn't got the out-and-out horsepower, he hasn't got the straight line speed. The same thing applies when you go to put the power on at those lower speeds. When you put up a fairly crude rear wing, which is how you get downforce, in the case of Inoue, he had less downforce, so therefore at low speeds the back end of the car much less predictable. It would snap into oversteer, as we saw.
Eddie Irvine getting ready to come out, and now we're just beginning to see a little bit more action. Giovanni Lavaggi come out onto the circuit, the second of the Pacifics, having his first run here this weekend, as I say, not managing to get out this morning at all. Irvine was going quickly this morning. He dropped down the order by the end of the session, but at one point he was actually second fastest, and it looked as though the Jordan Peugeots, as you say, John, with a fairly low downforce setup, they were setting some of the fastest speed trap figures.
Indeed they were, and they were almost as quick at 3:27, 3:28, I think was a time for Rubens Barrichello. And of course, what you've got to do is find that balance. Barrichello ended up fifth quickest, but he was 1.5 seconds slower than Alesi, so almost identical speed on the straight, but of course the time, that 1.5 seconds being lost in the lower speed corners and then through these Lesmo corners where we see Roberto Moreno in his 40 Corsa Ford.
There's, you can get a good example of what we're talking about. It's sometimes difficult to explain the high downforce, low downforce. But if you look at that rear wing, notice how difficult it is to see the Parmalat written across it. That's probably the easiest way of saying this is a low downforce setup.
Indeed it is. That is the benchmark to judge how much downforce a car is running. If you can see the sponsor's name clearly, then they've got a lot of rear wing on that car. Oh, and Moreno very lucky to get away with that on the exit of the Ascari chicane, because at one point the car was pointing towards the barriers. He got it straightened out, continues on his way, and this will be the completion of a third lap for Roberto Moreno as Taki Inoue improves yet again down to a 1:32.597, and that would have made him 9th quickest if he had done that time this morning.
Well, Roberto Moreno crosses the line. Let's see if there's any improvement. 35.202. At least he's had the advantage of a little bit of testing here already last week. But he goes third fastest behind Inoue and Montermini. Mark Blundell looking at the monitors, and he also waiting to come out. We haven't seen any of the quick runners come out. Really what we're watching at the moment is the battle for the back end of the grid. The likes of Taki Inoue, Andrea Montermini, Roberto Moreno, Pedro Diniz, he's on track now as well, and Giovanni Lavaggi. Now he's bound to get some interest from the Italian cameras here this weekend. He's in his last Grand Prix because next race, the Estoril Grand Prix, the Portuguese Grand Prix, his seat will be taken over by Jean-Denis Delatraz. So Lavaggi will be hoping to get a finish here at Monza. I think that'll be the basic objective in his rather short Grand Prix career so far.
Well, there's the information. 4 cars on track. And I suppose the upside of that is that by the time we get through into the second half of this first qualifying session, the majority of the tail enders will have completed the majority of their laps. And the difficulty that every racetrack and every race driver faces, that's traffic at a critical point of a out-and-out qualifying lap. Always a pole lap, of course, means that we may actually see the front runners getting the opportunity to do those pole laps they always talk about.
Lavaggi coming round to complete this lap, the 37-year-old, very much a gentleman racer, Lavaggi, a sort of breed that I suppose we don't see so much in Grand Prix racing these days. He's made his career as a businessman much more than as a racing driver, came into racing much later. He's decided to come into the pits, just looking back at some of the slow motion shots. But as I say, delaying the start of his career, he didn't have the chances to go motor racing early on, and has come in really as a sports car level, much more than in single-seaters, but in the last couple of seasons has gotten more involved in single-seaters and deciding to get into Grand Prix racing this year, and obviously bringing money to the team that enabled him to do that. And Lavaggi out of that car from the end of this race. Now you're looking at Ukio Katayama, the Japanese driver in the Tyrrell Yamaha, and Tyrrell hoping for better things here this weekend.
Well, they've got a fly-by-wire throttle mechanism, which doesn't sound very much, but in fact, in terms of driving the car, the V10 Yamaha engine, means there's a lot more you can do in terms of how the throttle and the engine operate together. It ought to make a better performance, but it gives the driver a great deal more control, and it means the engine can do more things in relation to the throttle position. So, step forward for Yamaha as Ukio Katayama begins what is a second, in fact, flying lap. He's already completed 2 laps, but his time really just getting a feel for the car and now trying to do something a little bit more serious.
What was interesting at Spa was when we had that rather wet conditions and they were all out on slicks, there was a point in the race there where Ukio Katayama was actually doing lap times very similar to Michael Schumacher, and it seemed to show that the Tyrrell was working well in those particular conditions, but perhaps they're having to change it to work in the normal dry conditions.
Well, I think in rain there's so many factors that can affect a performance, and you sometimes see performances which are out of their normal slot. Now there's not the way to take Lesmo 1. There was an error on the part of Katayama. He went in too far on the left. He couldn't get the car in. Runs very, very wide, probably in frustration over the curve and the exit of Lesmo 2. Now he makes that long run down up to the final chicane, the Ascari chicane. We saw him under braking into the second chicane, being unstable, the car wandering around. Now, again, in the middle of the change of direction, going from left to right, the front of the car not looking stable. Basically, what's happening is the back of the car is moving around. So now that long run into the parabolica, and a lap which for Katayama will not have been satisfactory. He's had a number of areas where he would have lost time. He will improve, and in fact, he ought to end up being quickest of everybody so far on the circuit. But we have to see, can he improve? And Taki Inoue's 1:32.957.
Yes, well, no, he can't. He goes second fastest by 0.9 of a second, so Taki Inoue still the fastest so far, and Ukio Katayama is second.
Just look the way that car moves around under braking. Normally it's been bumpy there on the approach into that chicane. Certainly a lot of people today have been in trouble there. And he's the first of the heavy hitters to really go out and try and establish a time. Fastest so far is Ukio Katayama, who did improve on his time on that last lap, but I think we're going to see a big improvement from David Coulthard. And we'll see that very shortly as they come down to the second chicane, and somebody is off. There's lots of dust. We don't know who that is. We have to wait and see. That's right, the Ascari chicane. That's on the way back, but that's unfortunate for David Coulthard. We hope that whatever that was will not affect his first run. Well, it's Eddie Irvine, the man who he hit the curb on the exit, and Irvine has spun. Has he stayed off the barrier, or is he going to make contact? But he's on the gravel. Can he stay off those tires? We have to wait and see. And I think, has Irvine got away with it? If he has, it'll make it 3 so far today, and that's maybe going to get it out of his system. But the exit of that Scary chicane may well have pebbles on the racing line, and David Coulthard hopefully will have a flag to warn him. A car has gone off there. Again, we see Irvine attack the curb. The tyre still not, that top surface of rubber off. Lost control, but if he ever got a result today, he got it there. And I would hope that Irvine will make it back to the pits. We don't know yet whether that is the case. The camera just is unable to catch that part of the corner. We look for the head-on shot, but we don't get it because Coulthard comes across the line to complete his first time lap, 1:27.935. Now, if you look back to 1994, pole position set by Jean Alesi was a 1:23.844 with a circuit that was quicker, with 3.5-litre engines. I would anticipate something between 2.5 to 3 seconds slower than that would be where pole ought to be by the time Saturday qualifying is finished. But Coulthard, suddenly the first man to break that 1:30 barrier here today with a 1:27.935.
Michael Schumacher watches on from the Benetton pit as Coulthard further improves on the split time, at least the first split. Coulthard, a much better performance in the race from Spa than we'd seen in the previous races. Coulthard was actually pulling away up front, remember, until he retired with gearbox problems. And he's out to try and make up for that disappointment here at Monza this weekend. Last year here at Monza, he suffered disappointment when he ran out of fuel on the final lap, when he was running in second place to Damon Hill. But you can see he's attacking these chicanes. They have to use the curbs a little bit, but try not to use them too much, which then sets them way offline.
And the exit of that final chicane, very important, because it determines your top speed as you approach the parabolica. But this, the most critical corner now at Monza, you've got to get the car in. You've got to get position absolutely perfect, because it's such a long corner. If you don't get it perfect at the beginning, you'll be wrong all the way through. 1:27.020, and that will not last very long, because I'm sure, should Coulthard care to continue, he will improve yet again. And remember, we have still not seen either Ferrari, Damon Hill, Michael Schumacher, et
Back out onto the circuit, and another of the top front runners that we would expect to do well, Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Mercedes. His Belgian Grand Prix didn't last very long. It only lasted till the end of the first lap when he spun it at La Source, but he had been very quick over the weekend. He'd qualified in third place, remember, and we're certainly seeing an upturn in form from the McLaren Mercedes team. They've got a heavily revised car being built at the moment back in Woking, which they're certainly hoping for great things as we reach the end of the season. But they also think that they're getting on well with this car at the moment, and Mika Häkkinen could be one to watch this weekend. Let's just see what this first flying lap is, a 29.120. That's 2.1 seconds slower than David Coulthard, but perhaps this next lap will put him somewhere nearer.
Mika Häkkinen went off at this part of the circuit this morning. He made contact with that tyre wall on the outside, and again, he doesn't seem to have lost too much enthusiasm. This is again back at the Ascari. You can see just how the car moves around. You've got to go from left, then back to right, then back to left. That's where Irvine clipped the curve on the exit. He has finally made his way back into the pits.
Häkkinen's off. Häkkinen's gone off down at one.
And he is even worse off, because that car is buried in the gravel trap and he ain't going anywhere. And that is a further disappointment for the McLaren Mercedes-Benz team. And Mika Häkkinen may well not be flavour of the day with the team when he goes back to the pits and tries to explain away that one.
Certainly things not going well for him. Off this morning, off again this afternoon, and that very short race in Belgium. Of course, in the meantime, Alain Prost has been testing for McLaren. Now let's have a look, see what happened here.
Yeah, second chicane, braking, turns in the back end. The grip there is very limited. Oh, and he's damaged the front wheel anyway. I would say a steering rod or something has been damaged. It looked like that left wheel as it went over the curb started to move freely, but there the car, the belly of the car, is on that gravel trap. The wheels are dug in, and of course nowhere for Häkkinen to go. But I believe that in his excursion across one curve across the racetrack back into that second gravel trap, that he in fact did damage the left front steering arm, probably broke the steering arm at the wheel end.
So not a good start for the team. Mark Blundell has just come out onto the circuit as well, but now you're looking at Damon Hill. First time that we've seen him this afternoon. And what can he do to try and match or beat his teammate fastest so far? Remember, David Coulthard, Mika Häkkinen second, Martin Brundle is third.
Let's just watch what Mika did. That's the brakes on the car. The back end got away, went over the curb. Now watch that left wheel, see if it starts to move around. Difficult to tell, and we don't get enough time to have a final look. But Damon Hill out finally onto the track, and Damon Hill spent almost half that session in the pit lane waiting for the opportunity he feels is best for him to get out, just do his first run, and doing exactly what teammate David Coulthard did some moments ago, weaving around, trying to get as much energy into those tires before he taxed Parabolica again to get that maximum grip off the corner. And this car this morning, even in wet conditions, Coulthard was the first to go out in slicks, and even in those tricky conditions you could see how well that car works.
Damon Hill has won the last two Italian Grand Prix here at Monza. Very confident about this circuit. It's one of the circuits that he really loves. And now we get a chance to see just how fast he can be. Flavio Briatore of Benetton watching on the monitors. Michael Schumacher still not coming out of the pits. We've still not had any laps from him, nor from either of the Ferraris so far. Interesting that they're all waiting so long, and they will be very closely watching Damon Hill, but he's slower on the first split.
And as you say, one of the two Ferraris is making its way down to the pit exit, and very shortly indeed the entire Italian crowd here supporting Ferrari will go wild as they have the first opportunity this afternoon. And it is Gerhard Berger who is going to take that and give all those fans something to shout about.
Damon Hill continuing on his way, heading down towards the Ascari chicane, and this is where we saw Eddie Irvine get into trouble earlier on in this session, and Irvine did make it back into the pits, so we will be seeing more of him later on, but just hope that there was no damage done to the car which prevents him coming back out later in this session. And Damon Hill coming round now to complete what will be his first proper flying lap. He's done a 38.2 so far, but 26.795, that's the target. That's been set by teammate David Coulthard, who's done 6 laps so far and is 2.3 seconds faster than anybody else.
Well, a massive 2.3 seconds slower than teammate Coulthard, but remember, Coulthard did his time on his 6th lap, a function of that hard A compound Goodyear rubber. So Damon Hill on way 4th quickest on his 4th lap. 2 more laps in which he has got on that set of tyres to get himself up onto the front row of the position. Rubens Barrichello in the other of the two Jordan Peugeots joins Coulthard currently on that front row. We just see Johnny Herbert. He's the first of the two Benetton Renaults. He's been sent out to test the water before Michael Schumacher gets out. But Herbert did a great job this morning. 2nd quickest, and there, well, Damon Hill being slowed down by fellow Brit. He pulls over, but that will have cost Damon time, and that's another lap that really he will feel frustration about, and probably he didn't expect to get it from Johnny Herbert.
No, indeed, that certainly will affect things for Damon Hill. Johnny just weaving around also to get a bit of heat into these harder tyres and to try and repeat the performance that we saw this morning when he took that 2nd fastest time. Was running a pretty low downforce setup to achieve that, was very fast across the start-finish line. And I think he may well be trying that setup again to start off with in this first official session. And that will give Benetton an idea as to whether that's the right way to go for the weekend. Damon Hill then about to cross the line, but it's not going to be enough to match David Coulthard. We saw him get a little held up behind Johnny Herbert, and Damon Hill's 2nd fastest, but 1.8 seconds slower than his teammate. Then it's Rubens Barrichello. Mark Blundell, no, Mark Blundell's just gone 2nd fastest as I speak. Blundell 2nd, Hill 3rd, Barrichello 4th, and Häkkinen 5th.
And I would imagine that McLaren, they will try and get Mark Blundell to get through as many of his laps as possible. They may well want to give Mika Häkkinen an opportunity, but having had Mika go off twice, once this morning and we saw earlier in the session, the team may well feel, we've got Häkkinen in the race, he's presently 5th quickest, should we stick with Blundell? He's done a good job. Currently second quickest, but 1.6 seconds behind David Coulthard. Would it be right? Would we gain by putting Hakkinen back into Blundell's car, or just leave situations as they are?
Gerhard Berger goes second fastest, half a second behind David Coulthard, and looks as though he's going to go onto another quick lap, just attacking these curves down at the chicane, and the flick, the change of direction. The car looks so quick, changing direction there.
And Gerhard Berger used the curve right to the very end as he powered the Ferrari out of that first chicane. Now through the curve of Grande, much wider. You see in the background, ooh, a big lockup of the right wheel coming in. Can he get through? 29 hundredths of a second faster at that first intermediate point, but that lockup is an indication just how tricky the braking area is, and Gerhard Berger's backed off. He's decided, I've done too much to that one tire in that corner. I've compromised. I'm going to back off, complete this lap. I suspect he will then, as he comes down to Parabolica, again pick up the speed and then try again.
Berger and Alesi, along with the Minardi and 40 course teams, having had the advantage of a bit of testing here last week. This is their nominated test track, but they have not been able to do much here because of the changes to the circuit. So although they've got a little advantage, perhaps they've had a chance to sort out the correct gear ratios for the revised Lesmo and that sort of thing, it's not a major advantage this time, with fairly restricted running here so far this year. Now this is one of the Ligiers, that's Olivier Panis, just slipstreaming past Gerhard Berger and into the final corner. So far Panis is 9th fastest, with Martin Brundle 10th fastest, so the two Ligiers pretty close together, and we'll have to see if there'll be an improvement.
There's the man who was quickest this morning, Jean Alesi. We saw teammate Gerhard Berger, in fact, I think opting to go back into the pits. He had brake problems this morning, and we did see that brake problem was the reason that he has chosen to go back into the pits. But Alesi, with that Evolution 3 V12 engine, using the curb and even using the dirt beyond the curb, now that is getting into unknown territory. And the only man we saw there this morning, well, we saw a couple, but in fact, Irvine got off all four wheels there as well. 10th of a second down at that intermediate point, and traffic ahead. That's not going to help him very much. Barrichello as well. Michael Schumacher looking in his mirrors. He will stay on the right, let Alesi go through. But Barrichello, who probably is on his way back into the pits, as he has completed a run, he's done 6 laps. This is his 7th lap, and I think he'll get out of the way. And yes, he does. And Alesi comes up through to complete his 4th flying lap.
So is Alesi going to grab provisional pole here? No, 3rd fastest, 27.235. It's Coulthard ahead of Hill now. Hill has moved up to 2nd. He's only 95,000.
Look at Alesi, sorry. Absolutely unreal. And that was like an animal the way he threw that car in. That wasn't a human being driving it. He just chucked the car one way, chucked it back the other way. People down at that first chicane love it. They love that passion. But of course, it's no good for lap times.
Well, Alesi managing to get past the traffic. Montermini was the next car on his list there, and it looks as though he's certainly attacking still on this lap to see whether he can further improve. 3rd fastest so far. The two Ferraris, in fact, together on times, 3rd and 4th, with Barrichello 5th, Johnny Herbert 6th, then Mark Blundell 7th.
And again on the exit of the Lesmo, the second of the two Lesmos, throws the car in. The car comes out of the corner. The wheels are all pointing straight, but it's in a slide. Looks wonderful. Great to talk about. There's the result. Over 0.6 of a second slower than David Coulthard, and he's still got to compete almost 1/3 of the circuit. And if he drives like that, that 0.6 of a second will increase.
Interesting that Damon Hill's fastest time, which has put him into 2nd, it was also done on his 6th lap, exactly the same as David Coulthard. And it does look as though they need to do a few laps on these tyres. Certainly with the Williams, it may be different with the other cars. Now, Alesi, he was down on the last split. I don't think he's going to be able to take Coulthard's time. 27.407 for Alesi, and that's just 0.2 of a second slower than his best so far.
Well, look back again at the Ascari chicane. I was going to talk about Alesi, much cleaner through the first chicane on the following lap. So Jean Alesi, in fact, between the 3rd chicane and start-finish line, clawed back 0.2 of a second. But Michael Schumacher really is the man who's gone out very quietly, not had too much attention on him. 28.306. That puts Schumacher all the way down in 9th. Now, I would have expected something a little bit more dynamic from the reigning world champion.
But he has only done 3 laps so far, which is interesting compared with both the Williams having done 6 before they set their fastest laps. And he looks as though he's on a quick one at the moment.
And the important thing is he's got a fast car ahead of him, so he can judge his own performance. There you see Schumacher at the final intermediate point before they make it across start-finish line. Potential pole position lap for Michael Schumacher. But he's got Jean Alesi ahead of him. Will Alesi be the first to demote David Coulthard off that pole position, or is it going to be this man, Michael Schumacher?
Again, Schumacher driving hard, and you can really see the car working as he tries to drag the best time out of the Benetton Renault and heads down towards start-finish line. Now building up to 200 miles an hour as he crosses the line, and he moves up to 4th fastest. Not enough to pip Coulthard, Hill or Alesi.
But the first 4 cars very, very close indeed. Less than 0.2 of a second between David Coulthard and Michael Schumacher in 4th place. So the battle at the head of this field really exceptional indeed.
Indeed, John Alesi improved his time on that lap, but you were quite right. As he crossed the line ahead of Schumacher, he did a 26.965, and again, that was on his 6th lap. So it seems to be fairly consistent.
Michael Schumacher on his 5th lap, and again, in the background, the Ferrari, but when you see Schumacher let the car drift, he was a little bit too late in turning in, and then when he made the turn, he's off the track at Lesmo. Michael Schumacher compounds an error in the first Lesmo by going way off into the gravel, onto the grass and back in. Now I wonder, was that because when he went into the Lesmo one he got dirt? There was dust, there was little bits of rubber, particles of rubber shredded from the tire on the outside. I wonder, is that what caused him to go off? Because one would not expect. This is Michael Schumacher. There you see what happens. The car gets away from him. He's got to get lock on. He's into the gravel. He's driving the car through the gravel. Now catching a very, very muddy grass verge to the track. And he'll be straight back into the pits to explain that one to Flavio Briatore.
Just as well he hit that grass going straight, because we had a heavy downpour of rain here yesterday, and the grass everywhere is very wet indeed. If he'd hit that at any sort of angle, then it would have taken him straight off into the barrier, but thankfully he was straight by that point.
Almost reminiscent of what we saw happen in Belgium 2 weeks ago. The car slides and then it starts to turn left. Now, I still have not had an explanation from the Benetton team as to why, when Benetton's get sideways like that, the car then steers the opposite direction it should be going.
Eddie Irvine crossing the line. Let's see where he is at the moment. He's quite a lot further down the order.
He's 22nd, in fact, because he's not even on page 1 of the Tag Heuer timing, and that was because Irvine got the result of the day as far as I'm concerned. He had a big, big spin in the exit of the 3rd chicane. He kept it off the tire wall, he kept it out of the barriers, and he, more importantly, limped back into the pits. And he's back on the track. But again, you see how the low downforce setups of some of these cars on Jordan are running a fairly low downforce. How unstable the car is under braking. And a driver, rather than trying to go to what he would think is the natural physical limit of the car at that point, it's being compromised by the bumps. So you should just back off that maybe 1/10 of a second, which seems like a lifetime to a racing driver, earlier. But make sure the car is composed. Then drive the car under power through the chicane. You'll actually pick up time rather than what most people would think that's lose time. Back to the point of the circuit where he had his big off, and this time he's done a much better job. He stayed off the curb on the inside, and now going out to complete, this will be his 5th lap, 5th flying lap. And Irvine, well, he'll certainly make it up somewhere into the top 15 on this lap, but he's got a long way to go to get himself up to the regular place we see Irvine in the Jordan, which is round about 6 to 10.
So we wait to see what time he does. Interesting to see how twitchy the car was under braking. It's something that Eddie's been talking about all year long. He's moved himself up to 12th place. And so good progression, but he needs to find more than that, obviously. He's talked about this problem earlier on this year with the way that the weight transfers onto the front of the car. And he likened it the other day when he was talking about it to the motorcycle racers, when you see them braking hard, have all the weights on the front tyre and the back tyres waving around in the air. And he says that in Formula One car, you get a similar sort of feeling.
Well, he seems to suffer from that problem, whereas Barrichello doesn't. And it appears it's a function of how Eddie not just drives his car, but how the car may well be set up. And one of the reasons that may contribute to that is a driver has the choice with his car to alter the rake of the car. In other words, the front of the car be closer to the ground than the rear of the car. And if you hit the brake pedal very heavily, the weight transfer just exaggerates that situation, and it is conceivable that the rear wheels come off the ground, though I have to say it's a pretty rare thing. I've never personally experienced it, but this man certainly claims it happens to him all the time.
Well, he's looking pretty smooth on this next time lap. He's completed 5 so far. This will be his 6th. And we've seen that most people, Coulthard, Hill and Alesi, up front, all set their best times on their 6th lap. So can Eddie Irvine further improve his time? Rubens Barrichello is 7th at the moment. Heinz-Harald Frentzen is 8th, by the way. Marc Blundell 9th, and Olivier Panis 10th.
Looks a good effort from Irvine here. A very good entry into the Parabolica. A good, quick, clean exit. So a big improvement up to 11th. Not a big improvement in time, up to 11th. But still 1.6 seconds slower than David Coulthard, the man who has retained pole position, much against what I suspected may be the case. But since all the top runners have completed their 6 laps, they're back in the pits, and they're now waiting for the closing moments. We've got just under 14 minutes, 13 minutes 45 seconds of this first session remaining. So who will be first up? Will it be Hill, Coulthard, or Michael Schumacher decide that I've got to do something very special and not what you saw him do when he got it all wrong going into the first Lesmo, and even worse than all wrong in the second one?
Watching Marc Blundell at the moment, and Marc is down in 9th place. Remember, Mika Häkkinen already a victim of this first qualifying session, and perhaps we'll see him take over Marc's car at the end of the session. Marc has currently done 8 laps out of his 12, so this may well be his last run, and then there'll be a mad panic in the McLaren pit to get the seat adjusted, the pedals adjusted, whatever changes are necessary to get Mika Häkkinen in the car. So we shall see if there's any improvements. The second split is coming up to see whether he's close to Coulthard. Well, only 0.6 of a second down so far, so he could well move up further into the top 10.
Well, he currently is 1.4 seconds slower than Coulthard, so that minor difference ought to see Marc Blundell move up to, say, somewhere around 7th, 6th place. But he has to maintain that difference from that Ascari chicane all the way down and through the Parabolica, then the drive, and you see how wide they run, right out to the very edge of the circuit for a long way, and then onto the start-finish straight. 8th place, so he didn't quite make it to 6th or 7th, but he got up to 8th.
There's a bit of a gap between him and Rubens Barrichello. It's around about half a second, certainly down to Barrichello in 7th. The top 7 cars really are very close, as I say, just split by half a second from Coulthard to Barrichello. Then that little bit of a gap to Marc Blundell, then Frentzen and Panis rounding out the top 10. There you can see the times, and just look how close particularly those top 4 are. Working our way down the list, there you can see.
Yes, Marc Blundell, he's got Jean-Christophe Bouillon ahead of him, and there is Bouillon as he's going into the second Lesmo, and Marc Blundell will be anxious to have Bouillon not come into play as they come down to that final chicane, because that will cost time for Blundell, and he may well have to just lift up momentarily earlier, not run up too close to the back of the Sauber Ford, because you will then lose your momentum, and that is precisely what has happened. Bouillon has been a bit of an old woman through the chicane. He's caused Blundell to lose time. Blundell not particularly happy as he pulls across the front of Bouillon, and that's the message he's saying is, you're all right, Pratt, for doing that, you spoiled my lap.
Well, an interesting shot from that rear-facing camera on Marc Blundell's car as well. You get a good shot of how the rear suspension works. We couldn't quite see back to Jean-Christophe Bouillon's car from that angle. But let's see if there's an improvement from Blundell. 27.837 is his previous best, and he's within a few thousandths of a second, but it's not enough to improve.
But that lap, I predict, would have been better, but Bouillon, in that final chicane, was just very unhelpful. Now, he probably didn't realize, you know, he's a tiny little guy. He can hardly see forward, let alone see backwards in the Sauber Ford. But it caused this man to lose a lap that I'm quite certain when he talks to us later will say, I would have been quicker than my 28.4.
So it looks as though he's continuing on, and indeed it does look as though this is the final hard charge for Marc Blundell. 10 laps completed out of the allowable 12. And let's just remind you, still David Coulthard fastest from Damon Hill. The 2 Williams Renaults heading the timesheet so far Jean Alesi third for Ferrari, then Michael Schumacher down in fourth with teammate who you can see there, Johnny Herbert, in fifth place. And remember, this weekend Renault have got a revised engine once again. The RS7C we're on to now. They had a revised engine at Manicourt early this year, and in fact apparently they had this engine at Spa, although they didn't tell anybody. Now they've got it here at Monza, and we'll have to wait and see whether it's going to be enough to take on Ferrari's best.
Well, as everybody has been trying to close down to Renault go on just really put a sting on the entire Formula One world by bringing out the C version of this engine. And well, Renault, who have had such an enormous influence in the recent years with their V10 engine, just seem to keep getting more and more. If it's not just power, it's torque. If it's not torque, it's something else. And I mean, I just am amazed that they can provide two top teams with identical engines and total reliability.
Johnny Herbert goes on to a flying lap. He'd just come out of the pits the previous lap, so in no time, always over the curbs there.
Well, that was just total misjudgment on the part of Johnny Herbert. He decided to attack the first part of the entry to the chicane. He did it totally wrong. It unsettled the car, and again, he would have lost chunks of time. And I hope, well, he realizes that you can only throw a car around so much. There's over 7/10 of a second. Now, the way he went in there was just so aggressive, and it served no purpose whatsoever.
We must remember that he had one of his best qualifying performances of his career up to date last year here for Lotus when they had the new Mugen engine, and he qualified in fourth place, a superb effort, only for it all to go wrong at the start of the race when Eddie Irvine hit him down at the first chicane. But he obviously enjoys this track.
Well, he does enjoy the track, but there's a few other people who like it as well, and they are David Coulthard, Jean Alesi, Michael Schumacher. They're all back out onto the track as we come to the 8 minutes 15 seconds remaining in this first qualifying session, and everything's going to brew up very nicely indeed.
Indeed it should do. Johnny Herbert then, let's see if there's any improvement. Doesn't look like there will be, because so far he's only half a second off Coulthard on his previous best lap, and we already saw him lose 7/10 on the first split. So I don't think this one's going to be an improvement from Johnny, but he may well make things better on the next lap. 28.532, yes, some way off what he'd achieved before.
Let's see if he can get, oh, well, I was going to say, let's see if he can get through, but there we see a Williams going wide, and we don't know whether that's Coulthard. In fact, it is David Coulthard, gets it all wrong, very much in the same way that I suspect Michael Schumacher. Now, that happened somewhat earlier because we saw Herbert drive through that gravel. We didn't know where it came from. The answer is David Coulthard. And again, on these parts of the circuit which have got new tarmac and the track not being used in dry conditions this morning, it is very slippery.
Jean Alesi then, 54 the time, ticking away, but he's only 2/10 slower than David Coulthard. So can Alesi now try and snatch the provisional fastest time away? Coulthard is still out on the circuit.
Olivier Panis, he's decided to have a little trip into the gravel beds. That's the end of his session. And again, in a part of the track where the marshals have got to get to the driver to get him away safely, but cars very close indeed.
Jean Alesi out of the final corner, running wide onto that white line to see whether he can get just that little bit more speed out of the Ferrari. Now, is this going to be enough to beat Coulthard? It's not, 0.190, and it still keeps him third fastest so far. Just a fraction behind both Hill and Coulthard. There, the yellow flag's being waved with Panis's car being recovered, and Jean Alesi getting past there safely. That should not have affected him too much, and he's on to another quick lap.
Alesi just sneaked into that second chicane. The back of the car was wanting to put itself to the front, but he got it through. That's the remarkable control that Jean Alesi possesses, and he gets that car in angles that we never even think about, and he still recovers. But that is a very, very forgiving car. Now, next year, when he goes to Benetton, who currently have a car which is nowhere near as forgiving as Ferrari, 3.5 tenths more than that faster than David Coulthard. But again, a wobble in the middle of that final chicane. Can he maintain that advantage? He's got to get down this straight, almost 200 miles an hour before he breaks into Parabolica, exit the Parabolica, and over 200 miles an hour as he comes across the start-finish line. It's going to be very close, but if he does it, this place will erupt.
Jean Alesi took his first pole position here at Monza last year. This is only first qualifying, but can he snatch the provisional pole from David Coulthard across the line? No, he can't.
Because David Coulthard had improved. David Coulthard, when we were watching Alesi, had already improved again to a 1 minute 25.516. And Damon Hill now down onto the second row of the grid alongside his good friend and teammate, or not teammate, good friend, let's call him that, Michael Schumacher.
So Schumacher and Hill right together in terms of times once again, but it's Coulthard and Alesi fastest. So we just have 4.5 minutes left in this session. That's Olivier Panis, a replay of him spinning down at the first chicane.
Yes, Ligier and Martin Brundle particularly not happy at all with the car, the balance of the car, the setup of the car. There's problems for David Coulthard. He's in traffic, but he may well decide, well, I've got one more lap. In reality, this, I have just to cool it. But a gaggle of cars, look at this. Everybody trying to make their way around. Roberto Moreno and the tail across the front of Mika Salo, and no mercy at all from the young Scot, saying, sorry chum, I'm here to get pole position. You can make your own way, but I'm going to take the line. And that's the way life is when you're in a top team.
This is the last lap for Coulthard. He's done 11, so in fact he's got to come in at the end of this lap. So I hope he bears that in mind, because there's not much point in charging around here, because he's not going to be able to improve on his pole time so far.
Well, I think Coulthard will go ahead and finish this lap, because in fact where the start-finish line is ahead of where the Williams pits are. So he should be able to complete 12 laps and come back into the pits and not cross start-finish line for a final time. Just, it depends. Some racetracks have got the start-finish line before the pits, others have got it after the pits. Monza is one of those where the start-finish line is after the pits, so Coulthard can complete his final and 12th lap, and he will look for further advantage. Currently it's 0.807 of a second from Jean Alesi and 0.815 of a second from teammate Damon Hill.
Fabulous performance so far from Coulthard, and Alesi's only got 1 lap left. Damon Hill's only got 2 laps left, so it's looking good for the Scot, and this really is a tremendous performance and exactly what he needs at the moment, while his name is being mentioned all over the place in the driver market.
And a good exit onto this final or second straight is Michael Schumacher. He's suddenly up onto the front row of the grid. 0.582 slower than David Coulthard, but can Coulthard improve, or will his time remain at 1 minute 25.516, 25.964? So that final lap of David Coulthard, slower than his previous best. And Coulthard, well, he can't be too sad, but this is what is going to worry him, because Michael Schumacher slows down once again. Now, I asked Johnny Herbert yesterday, who couldn't give me an answer why Michael Schumacher does that. We see him doing it continually. He thinks it might be just to, if you like, take a deep breath and compose himself, but he seems to do it with regularity.
So David Coulthard is fastest and has used up all his laps so far. Schumacher second, Alesi third, Hill fourth, and then Herbert and Berger.
One man who's had a little bit of luck this afternoon, Mika Häkkinen. He is back out on the circuit, but he is in Mark Blundell's car. So Mika Häkkinen, with just over a minute and a half remaining, is going to try and make it round before that checkered flag comes out to bring to an end this first session, to try and get that 1 lap in that will drag him all the way up from 12th place into the top 10.
Gerhard Berger locking up once again, as we saw on one of his earlier attempts, but didn't seem to lose too much time through it. He got into the chicane safely and now continues round, and I would expect to see an improvement from Berger. Meanwhile, Damon Hill's gone second fastest. Coulthard and Hill share the provisional front row again. Hill 0.3 of a second slower than Coulthard, still has 1 lap left to go. Schumacher has 2 laps left. Alesi has come back in, but this could be an improvement from Berger, as we see Pedro Diniz off at the side of the road.
And that's disaster for many people, because depending where that car is, there will again be a stationary or more likely a waved yellow flag. But there is Damon Hill, and there's Gerhard Berger, and Berger makes his way down. Now he might just get across the line. There's 40 seconds remaining. He will get across the line, but has he got laps? Yes, he's got tons of laps. This is only his 7th lap, so Berger can go on and do 1 more time lap, but Damon Hill will be very close. He would be about 10 seconds behind. Berger won 26.551. puts him into 5th place. Damon Hill, we wait to see him cross the line. Well, his 12th lap was 1:27.182, no improvement, so he remains on front row. The danger men are Gerhard Berger and Michael Schumacher.
As ever, Michael Schumacher, just 2 laps he's got left, but we've often seen him drag one out of the bag, if you like, right at the end of the session. There's the yellow flag with that car off at the side of the road, and Gerhard Berger certainly didn't slow down an awful lot.
He just scythed that Ferrari past the 40 Corsa Ford of Paolo Denise as he sat there hoping that Berger did not have a repeat of what we saw him do on the Sunday morning and last year when he went off of that chicane very fast indeed. That's really the reason that chicane has been taken away, to give the drivers a lot more space than they previously had.
So down towards the Ascari chicane, the final chicane here at Monza, and once again just watch the Ferrari over the curbs a little bit, but not too heavily through there.
Car looks lovely through there, just the slightest hint of understeer, but that's sufficient for the driver to get confidence and not be intimidated by that very quick change of direction. And still Damon Hill, no, not Damon Hill, Gerhard Berger pounding away. Damon Hill will be coming into the pits. You saw his Williams just in the long shot as he exited that final chicane, but here is Gerhard Berger on board, coming across the line. Can he improve?
He goes second fastest, so Hill is demoted back to the second row once again. It's David Coulthard ahead of Gerhard Berger, and the difference between Berger and Hill just about 100th of a second, but it's enough to put him back onto the second row. So Gerhard Berger improving in the dying moments of this session. And what of Michael Schumacher? He's 4th fastest. I don't think we're going to see any further improvement from him, and it looks as though the grid is basically set. We may see 1 or 2 changes, but I think we're basically there. It's David Coulthard fastest for Williams Renault, Gerhard Berger 2nd for Ferrari, Damon Hill 3rd fastest Williams Renault, and Michael Schumacher down in 4th in the Benetton Renault. And once again, Hill and Schumacher virtually together. Then Jean Alesi, Johnny Herbert in 6th, Rubens Barrichello 7th, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, good effort in 8th place with a revised Ford engine this weekend, and that certainly seems to be working well. Mark Blundell and Eddie Irvine then in 10th place after that earlier spin. Just looking on further down the list, Mika Hakkinen after that off early in the session ends up 12th. Martin Brundle 13th, then Sarlo, Lamy, good effort from him. Taki Inoue, good effort from him as well. Luca Bedoya, Jean-Christophe Bouillon, Ukio Katayama and Andrea Montermini. And then the last 3, Roberto Moreno, Pedro Diniz and Giovanni Lavaggi. And we didn't see Max Papis out there. For some reason, obviously some trouble for Papis, and no laps completed.
Well, there are thousands of delighted Ferrari fans. There you see Magic Jean, and that will guarantee, that performance from Gerhard Berger in the closing moments of this qualifying session will guarantee that come Saturday morning, getting into here will mean another very early start, because this place responds to how Ferrari are performing.
Ukio Katayama being towed back into the pits, ended up 19th and only did 8 laps, so disappointing run for him. But don't forget, tonight on Eurosport you'll be able to watch Pole Position with our review of today's qualifying, plus interviews, stories from the drivers, find out exactly what happened on the day that David Coulthard has set the fastest time so far. There's Jean-Christophe Bouillon, by the way. He's off at the side of the track again, and poor old Bouillon, really, he's been off so many times in recent qualifying sessions and races, putting in those great testing performances for Williams, but it just doesn't seem to be working out for him with Sauber.
Well, it just emphasises to me just how good a car, what a great car that Williams Renault is, because if Jean-Christophe Bouillon is struggling in the Sauber as he has been doing all year, and he gets into a Williams and performs, clearly the Williams is the reason why.
Well, don't forget, tomorrow we've got more live qualifying for you from 1 o'clock, just before 1 o'clock Central European time, 12 o'clock in the UK. And do bear in mind that this weekend, slightly later on the Sunday, we run an hour later on the Sunday for both the warm-up, which will be at 10:30 Central European time, and the race itself, which actually starts at 3 o'clock European time. Our programme will start at 2:30, which is 1:30 in the UK.
Well, then, we've had a pretty exciting qualifying session here. I can't wait until Saturday, and of course with Berger in the Ferrari on the front row, that's only going to fire up Jean Alesi. Who's going to bet against a Ferrari front row?